Hey everybody, this is the OMAD Dad, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, a channel that is dedicated to living the OMAD lifestyle, or eating one meal a day. Well, today we're back with another book review, and we have a really good one for you today. This is called Three Squares, The Invention of the American Meal. It's by Abigail Carroll, and it is a book about the history of American eating practices and how we've come to evolve into eating what we eat and how we eat today. This is not a history of all eating in general, and it doesn't start off in prehistoric times. It starts off in colonial times. And as a side note, she mentioned in the book that she didn't intend to write a book like this. She started a book about the history of snacking, and kind of the writing just took her in this direction, and it evolved to include all three meals and snacking in the thesis of this book. I like picking some of these books out and as a food for thought, for the pun, on this channel, books that generally help us kind of make the connections and understand OMAD better. And while it doesn't talk specifically about eating one meal a day in this book, once you read the book, you get a clear understanding that eating 3 square meals a day is really just an invention of some really good marketing and advertising campaigns. That this is really not how we would have ever eaten in the very long distant past, or even slightly more recently, within the past, say, it was a couple hundred years ago, particularly the founding of this country. And so she goes through breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacking, and she gives us kind of the history of it and how it all came to be. And it really was fascinating to see how Americans evolved. And when we first came over here, and nothing was really built, nothing was set up, and we were, kind of living off the land. And you fast forward to today with our modern eating system, and it's just complete night and day. So one of the things I want to get into is I like to talk about, we'll start with breakfast, for example. We've always been told in modern times that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but you read on to discover that that is more of a recent invention. And breakfast, even in Europe now, breakfast is not considered the most important meal of the day, and most people in Europe either skip breakfast entirely or just have a coffee and maybe a croissant. In America, we have such a big breakfast, mostly because of marketing. And a lot of these companies, which popped up after World War II, became bigger and bigger thanks to the invention of radio and television coming into our homes and telling us what we need to eat. This came all the slogans that you hear, beef, it's what's for dinner, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, you got to have 3 square meals, milk does a body good. I mean, I can keep going on and on. And in our country's foundings, breakfast would have been eaten a little bit, definitely a lot differently than it was today. And you have to understand that when people were living off the land back then, they got up around 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning at the most, and they started out, they were working in the fields, and they were doing laborious work around their property and what they had to do. And by the time I actually had breakfast, they had a good sized breakfast because they burned a bunch of calories beforehand and were starting to get hungry. Food wasn't as readily available as it is today. They didn't have grocery stores at every single corner, so food still had to be gotten about the old-fashioned way. You still had to go hunting and fishing and gathering, and by this time we still had some of our agricultural practices that we had learned and inherited while we were immigrating from Europe and other countries around the world. So with that, we also learned how to preserve food, like canning and methods of being able to keep food lasting longer for those lean months that we wouldn't have been able to get as much. And so, for me, I think this was a really fascinating book, and about each of the three meals and how they've kind of grown, and how we've got these cultural influences mostly from the old world in Europe and how they were brought over here. And one thing that Abigail Carroll mentioned too was when they came over here, the settlers came over here and saw the Native Americans and observed them. They noticed that they pretty much just ate when they were hungry. They didn't have any set meal times, and oftentimes their meals would dictate, what was available at the time, as it would make sense if you were living off the land. And the European settlers took this to be very barbaric and uncivilized. So that's why we get our 3 meals a day. It's that comes from a European influence. There is no historical evidence, there's no scientific evidence that says breakfast is the most important meal of the day, or that this meal is more important than that meal. And she makes it pretty clear. And unfortunately, it doesn't go, the book, probably one of my biggest complaints is that the book doesn't go into much of that science at all, or, delving into pre-American times as to how we would have eaten. It mostly it takes each meal and focuses on how historically our society was changing, particularly after the Industrial Revolution, and how that affected the way we eat. And as jobs became more technological and less hard labor, we were more sedentary, and we still sort of ate some of the same way. And that's when you see a lot more of these modern diseases coming into our society. It also talks about more of our industrial food system, where we're able to pump out all of this really, really cheap food. And I think the most telling chapter in this book is the book about snacking. And you know how we feel about snacking on this page and on this channel. Snacking is definitely what makes you fat. And it's interesting how she points out that, just 2 generations ago, 1 generation ago, sorry, we have a bunch of motorcycles driving by. Just a little while ago in our history, snacking was really looked down upon. You used to hear people say, "Oh, no, don't eat anything, you'll spoil your dinner, you'll spoil your lunch." That's how it was viewed. And now it seems like we pretty much get up in the morning, and from the time we're waking up to the time we're going to bed, we're constantly eating something. And so this book does it is worth a read. I think it's really interesting if you like that sort of a thing. I guess I'm a foodie, so it's something that I like, to really see the history of how all of this kind of came together, and how food was influenced by society, and how society was influenced by the food. And so I thought it was just a really excellent book. And at the end of this book, you really do walk away thinking, maybe, the way questioning the way we do things. And I think that's really important, just to become more aware and to question some of the things that you're doing and why you're doing them. That's probably one of the things that led you to OMAD, and why it just makes other people uncomfortable when you tell them, well, I'm only eating 1 meal a day. It's been so ingrained in our society that we need to eat constantly, and it's only becoming worse and worse, particularly when we have all of this cheap food and snacking available to us. Excuse me. And we have, food available 24/7, basically. She notes a huge rise in snacking, which is a newer trend in American experience. And she also notes the decline of the family meal. And I think, and I've mentioned this before, that when you go over to OMAD, for me, one of the benefits was kind of falling in love with food again, because you're hungry and you're eating to sustain your life, and it's been a day basically since you've eaten anything. When it comes time to eat again, you're really looking forward to it, and so you start thinking, oh, what am I going to have? And that's what gets maybe you try other traditions, but you have certain foods. Oh, I have a craving for this. So what I'm saying is this: it makes our eating experience more special, as opposed to just shoveling food in our mouth while we're driving to this destination or that destination, or just watching some boring TV show, and we're not even paying any attention to the experience at all. Again, this is not specifically mentioning OMAD in any way, but I do think that Three Squares, The Invention of the American Meal, is really a book that is worth reading if you really would be interested in the history and how it came to be, about how we put our meals together, and the way we go about eating in America today. I hope this post was helpful to you. I hope you're having a great time in your OMAD and enjoying it. We're finally getting some summer coming here. It's beautiful weather here in Massachusetts, so that's why I'm doing this outside today. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, or you can message me privately later. You can also join the official OMAD Dad Facebook group page. Send me a message and ask to be invited, and we'll get you in there. We have a lot more content in there. If you like what you see on the page, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button so that you can get notified when we do more of these videos. I have a lot more content coming up. Until then, we will see you soon, and I wish you all a very happy OMAD. Bye.